Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy.
And a reduction in the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15% solely for companies that make their product in America.
If the plan that Kamala is talking about is seriously taken, I think it can be a direction we'd like to take.
Well, I support Trump because of the economy, mostly.
With days to go until the US presidential elections, polls are showing Vice President Kamala Harris with a slight lead, except when it comes to one particular aspect. On the question of who do you trust more to manage the economy, American voters favor Donald Trump, if only by a slight margin. In this video, we're looking at the state of the US economy under the administration of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, with Kamala Harris second in command. We're looking at both candidates' economic plans, and we're comparing the economic performance of Republican and Democratic presidents going back 80 years, all in order to find out who is to be trusted more with the world's largest economy, and why does it matter to the rest of the world. So how is the US economy doing? According to Donald Trump, it's been declining for years and is now worse than anyone has ever seen. Of course, running against an incumbent, it can help criticizing the current state of affairs while offering to do things better. But in fact, the US economy is not doing bad at all. The US gross domestic product stands at over $27 trillion for last year. The US economy has made a strong recovery from the pandemic, the strongest, in fact, of any major industrialized country. GDP growth is expected to stand at 2.7% for the year. After the post-pandemic rebound, it has dropped to a historically healthy level. As for the job market, unemployment stood at 4.1% in September, showing a strong recovery from the pandemic. For international context, US unemployment is pretty much the same as in the UK. It's a bit worse than Japan, but better than China, India, and pretty much all European countries. As for inflation, the pandemic interrupted global supply chains and saw prices skyrocket. Inflation rose as high as 9%, but it has since cooled and was last measured at 2.4%, the lowest reading in 4 years and close to the Federal Reserve's long-held goal of 2%. Hence the central bank's recent move to cut interest rates by 50 basis points.
The U.S. Federal Reserve did a very good job laying out the strength that sees, the underlying strength that sees in the economy, and the fact that they need to bring a policy that's become overly restrictive back more towards a neutral line.
So much for where we're standing now. For voters, of course, the question is, what will the future bring? Let's take a closer look at what the candidates have told us about their economic plans. What are they promising Americans?
Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy. We will take on bad actors who exploit emergencies and drive up grocery prices by enacting the first ever federal ban on corporate price gouging.
Part of my plan under my opportunity economy is to give first-time home buyers a $25,000 down payment assistance so they can just get their foot in the door.
And when I'm back in that beautiful White House, we will pass larger tax cuts for workers, and we have a special tax that here is going to do, I think, quite well. It's called no tax on tips. And a reduction in the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15% solely for companies that make their product in America. They're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
For more than sound bites, let's turn to the candidates' campaign websites. For Kamala Harris, her opportunity economy tops the page, giving more details on how her tax cuts will be targeted and adding some numbers. A $6,000 tax cut to families with newborn children, a $5,000 to $50,000 tax deduction for new businesses, and a commitment to further invest in alternative energy, including the job creation the sector could bring. As for how she'll pay for it all, Harris plans to roll back Trump's tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, enact a billionaire minimum tax, and quadruple the tax on stock buybacks. So there will be tax hikes, but not for those earning less than $400,000 a year. Other ideas, like bringing down the cost of healthcare or investing in green energy, are building on initiatives already started under President Biden. On Donald Trump's website, details are scarce, but some of the goals are the same. Bring prices down, create jobs in America by preventing US companies from outsourcing manufacturing to other countries, and a large tax cut for workers. However, a tax cut Trump did enact during his presidency was also sold as worker-friendly, but it was strongly skewed towards helping the rich, as the nonpartisan Center on Budget and Policy Priority points out. The economists state that workers who earned less than about $114,000 saw no change in earnings, while top executive salaries increased sharply. As a matter of fact, Trump has an economic record he can be judged on. Economists say his tax cuts caused an expensive sugar high, and that Trump's trade war and tariffs hurt American consumers, businesses, and the economy. Tariffs are at the center of his current platform too. Despite all this, and despite his many bankruptcies, for slightly more than half of Americans, Donald Trump is still a former successful businessman. And he also benefits from a stubbornly held belief that Republicans are better stewards of the economy, although the historic record shows otherwise. Let's look at economic growth as measured by the US gross domestic product, the go-to indicator of the market's value of all goods and services produced and rendered. Turns out that going back to World War II, the US economy has grown at an average rate of 4.6% per year under Democratic presidents and 2.4% under Republicans. Also, 9 of the last 10 recessions started with a Republican in the White House. Using a slightly different methodology, Princeton economics professors Alan Blinder and Mark Watson peg the average annual GDP growth rate at 4.3% for Democratic and 2.5% for Republican presidents. Over a 4-year term, they say, the US economy on average grew 18.5% when a Democrat was in the White House and 10.6% under Republican presidents. As for the labor market, under Democratic presidents, the unemployment rate fell by an average of 0.8%, while it increased under Republican presidents by an average of 1.1%. But let's not only focus on the big picture, but have a look at what's in it for regular Americans. Real wages increased by $7,500 in all years under Democratic administrations, while rising $740 under Republican presidents. Adjusted for the years in the White House, Democrats increased wages almost 15 times as much as Republicans did. Or look at debt. How much further did any president push the country into the red? Here's a list of administrations going back all the way to Reagan in the 1980s. Turns out Republicans on average added much more to the debt pile than Democrats. A little caveat here, debt is not per se a bad thing. Except that debt grew under Republicans due to tax cuts mostly, whereas Democrats spent money on infrastructure and social and welfare programs. Here's another way to measure the economy: corporate profits and stock market returns. Going back to 1945, corporate earnings grew by 12.8% on average when Democrats controlled the White House, compared with 1.8% for Republicans. As for markets, the S&P 500 has averaged annual gains of 11.2% during years when Democrats controlled the White House versus 6.9% under Republicans. As of late, the trend has been holding up. US corporate profits are currently at an all-time high, as are both the Dow Jones and the broader-based S&P 500. Now, that was a lot of data points, but summing it all up, the US Senate's bipartisan Joint Economic Committee says, historically, Democratic presidents have inherited weak economies from their Republican predecessors and have responded with policies that jump-started economic growth and improved economic well-being. There's one exception to the rule: inflation. Under Democrats, inflation historically tends to rise, and it tends to fall under Republicans. However, economists say it doesn't come close to statistical significance. As of late, President Biden's reading was strongly skewed by the pandemic interrupting global supply chains, driving up prices. Now, there's a reason why most of the world is following the US elections closely. The world's largest economy is an important trading partner for almost all countries. The US main trading partners are neighboring Mexico and Canada, followed by China, Germany, and India. The country's total trade comes in at over $5 trillion, For trading partners, but also of course for the US, millions of jobs depend on trade. Donald Trump has made tariffs the key word in his campaign, continuing policies he started during his presidency. He follows a strictly protectionist philosophy and has not only attacked trade partners, but also the World Trade Organization that oversees trade, calling the WTO a disaster and threatening to withdraw from the body. The Biden-Harris administration has kept some Trump tariffs in place in recent years, but as candidate, Kamala Harris calls herself not a protectionist. However, she has said she would not support trade agreements that don't protect American workers and the environment. She's called for reforms to the WTO and for major investment in and subsidies for US businesses to strengthen their position over foreign partners. Now, I'm a journalist, not a campaign spokesman. The numbers in this video are official numbers by the US government. They include analysis by nonpartisan policy institutes and economists. It is their conclusion that the US economy has performed better under Democratic presidents than under Republicans. There is, of course, a reason for this, and it lies in each party's economic philosophy. Republican economics are based on tax cuts for the wealthy and especially for corporations. The idea is that corporations end up with higher profits, which can be invested, producing more jobs and greater wealth for all. This kind of trickle-down economics was made popular during the Reagan administration, but statistics show that it has never had the promised effect. Democrats, on the other side, tend to support tax cuts for the middle class, which don't have to be distributed to take effect. They directly help a much larger sample of Americans. Also, investment in major infrastructure projects create jobs on a larger scale. They are another pillar of democratic economics in the past. 400 economists have officially endorsed Kamala Harris for president. In an open letter, they write, "The choice in this election is clear between failed trickle-down economic policies that benefit the few and economic policies that provide opportunity for all." So Republicans might still be seen by some as the party best suited to manage the US economy. The numbers, however, tell a very different story.